Okay, let's get started. So we're going to talk a little bit today about how to use AI tools to support UDL. And this is going to be a hands-on workshop. So we're hoping that everyone will try this just a little bit at least as we walk through this. And if you'd like a copy of the slides, you can either use a QR code or that tiny URL, and it will give you a copy of this because there are a few links in here that might be useful. And if you either scan this with your phone or if you type in the URL, it will ask if you want to make a copy. This will give you a copy of the slides that you can then edit, modify, do whatever you'd like with. Is everyone hearing me okay? We had some technical issues here earlier. Hearing no responses? I'm hoping that worked. Okay, so universal design for learning. It grew out of universal design in general, which was referring initially mostly to architectural things, designing things so that they work for everyone from from the time they're built, rather than having to go back and change things. Because, well, just as a simple example, I was thinking about when I was, yesterday. Um, I worked at Duke for a number of years in the summer, and whenever they've done new remodeling on a building, they have to bring it up to current accessibility standards. And there was an interesting thing where they rebuilt many of the dorms that were originally built in the 1930s on campus, and they put in some really nice handicap facilities on all of the bathrooms in the buildings, except they don't have an elevator in those buildings. So they have really nice features for people who are handicapped if they could find someone to carry them up to their rooms. Again, with universal design, it's best to do this from the beginning, but often when we build courses, they're not done that way. But the purpose is to basically design your courses in a way so that they work for everyone. And most of the principles of UDL were based on research on how humans learn. And originally, these came about quite a while ago. They were initially focused mostly in middle school and high schools, but they've been extended to more use in college. And also, they were revised just a little under 2 years ago. And so we'll be talking about the current version of UDL. So here is the UDL framework, and I encourage you to just download a copy of that because it's useful to refer to. And there are really three basic principles or guidelines for UDL. And the goal is to design multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression. And engagement refers essentially to the why of learning. It refers to let me go back a step. It's basically trying to engage students, get them interested. We talk a lot about the decline in student engagement over the last decade or so, or certainly, especially since COVID. And these principles here are ways in which we can better connect to students or better connect students or provoke students' curiosity and interest and so forth. And there's a whole series of principles or strategies here. And very broadly, we're not going to go through each of these, but if you want to try to implement some of this, you can always go back and look at this to get some ideas. The first thing is just making your course interesting or connecting to students' identities. Often our classes are designed by people who are not generally who don't come from the same background or have the same interests as our students. And as we age, that probably gets more and more to be the case. So we want to perhaps optimize relevance, the value of the course, and the authenticity. And again, a lot of these things we've talked about in many workshops. nurture joy and play is something that could be useful. That learning can be fun, or, we don't have to rule out the possibility that learning can be fun. We want to come up with ways of talking about the goals of the course, collaboration and interdependence and collective learning. There's been much more of a shift in the 3.0 guidelines to the forming the sense of belonging and cohesion in a class, building a sense of community in classes. And also here, the executive functioning has been emphasized quite a bit more, helping students develop better skills at basically goal setting and pursuing those goals and so forth. So engagement is basically connecting to students' interests. Representation is how it's basically the how of learning. It's the materials that we use to help students learn. And that involves perhaps providing multiple means of conveying the information, building knowledge, and so forth. And the last part is actually, in some ways, what most people focus on quite a bit in UDL is giving students multiple ways of demonstrating the learning, of measuring how much they've learned and expressing that and so forth. Okay, so that's the basics of UDL, but how does AI connect to this? So there we go. No, I actually misstated this a little bit. Multiple means of representation is generally the what of learning, what we use to help students learn, the materials, the readings, the assignments, the videos, whatever. And action and expression is how they learn. And that's where students are actively engaged with the material. Okay. And the goal, again, is to provide that inclusive and accessible learning environment that works for all learners. So one way of getting started with this in terms of the UDL is helping students connect their own goals to the course learning objectives. And one thing that's kind of important to do there is discover what students' goals are. And again, these are just some of the points here, but supporting student agency and autonomy, promoting individual and collective reflection. The role of reflection in metacognition has been expanded quite a bit in the UDL guidelines. Connect to the NACE competencies. That's something I know on campus we've been working on a bit. That basically we want to show students that the things that they're learning in classes are going to be helpful in their future careers. And if they see that the things that they're learning are skills that they're going to be able to use later, that can be really helpful. And using a tilt approach. And this is something that's going to be coming up in a lot of the workshops this week and next week, is Marianne Winklemas's approach of transparency in learning and teaching. We'll talk about how AI can be used for each of these things. Okay, so one simple thing to do is to use an AI tool to evaluate the materials you already have. To suggest ways of connecting with students' interests. And one thing that I suggest, or I often suggest, is that you might want to do a pre-class survey or at the start of class, asking students about their career goals, their hobbies, and other interests. And that information can be used to help formulate things that connect to students' interests. And again, once you have this in, let's say, if you use a Google form and you get this in a spreadsheet, you can share this with a generative AI tool such as Gemini without any personal data. Although if we're using Gemini, if we're using the campus version of Gemini, we don't have to worry quite as much about this. But in general, it's best practice not to put student data directly in. But you can have an identifier for each student. It could be a number, it could be an alias that they pick. But basically, finding out more about what their interests are can be helpful. And I think I've got an activity coming up with that. That might be in a different workshop. I think it's in this one. Worked really well. I'm sorry. So let's actually just try that. I didn't have we had some tech issues that just got resolved right before this started. So, and I see there's a couple. Okay, yes, the URL was there. Did you get that, Steve? Let me go back. Sorry. There's the URL
I
right there.
did, John. Sorry, I didn't see your question. I apologize.
One more time. Okay. Now, what I was planning on doing there is connecting to Gemini. So let's try that. If you have a syllabus handy, try running it through Gemini or whatever your favorite tool is. And I'm just going to, I had planned on logging in and doing all this before, but again, the computer was under some work here. And I'm going to grab a syllabus and just problem, of course, with my authentication because I'm logged in as Celt and not as me, and it will not allow me to connect to that. Okay, never mind. Let me just do a quick Google search for a syllabus. Let's say a sample syllabus. And we want an actual syllabus. And I'm going to grab one. How about, here we go. A Birth of Playwriting, Introduction to Playwriting. I'm going to try downloading that. Seeing the option of downloading that. With that, there we go. Okay, now I'm going to go back over to Gemini and say, just try a simple prompt, evaluate, got to type it correctly, evaluate the attached syllabus for inclusive language, clear language, and clear language, well, inclusive. Clear language is part of the accessibility requirements. In clear language, appropriate, let's say for an undergraduate, I don't know if that's an upper level course, but let's just say an undergraduate student in a comprehensive university or college. And let's just say, and I'll attach that syllabus. This is a very simple one. Downloads, there we go. And also suggest changes to improve inclusivity and explain the reasons for the changes. And I have no idea what's in this syllabus. Now you can do this more thoroughly if you move from the Flash model, but let's go with the quick model just for the demo here and submit it. And you see it's suggesting some changes. Areas where you can make it more inclusive. Right now, the current text is you must not exceed one unexcused absence. 3 tardies equals 1 excused absent. So this is fairly rigid and punitive. And a lot of syllabi do look like this, that, many syllabi have been developed over the years where problems occur in classes and people put in more and more restrictions that make them look more and more like a legal document. So it's suggesting the focus more towards communication and community accountability, and suggesting, a more inclusive approach to address the needs of students who can't always get things done on time. So expressing it positively that the community of the class relies on their presence, et cetera. And it's still saying the same thing, that you are permitted 1 unexcused absence, but also communicating with the instructor so that you can find a solution where you can talk about it and so forth. And, it's a much more positive approach. You turn in late work, you'll not earn this. And again, it's very similar, requiring a doctor's note for any grades. And, that lower income and uninsured students might not be easily able to get that type of response. And so moving, suggesting that originally it says it should be a safe space, and it suggests making that a brave space instead, where people can take some risk and so forth. Because saying it's a safe space may suggest that you will not become uncomfortable, but a good part of learning is making people a little uncomfortable with their prior beliefs and so forth. And here, well, you can see that it took this syllabus and came up with a whole lots of changes here. Like here, the original expression was using standard script format. And again, someone who's just starting a class may not know that, what it means to be a standard script format and so on. Student tickets are $10. Fine, well, in any case, pretty much anything you submit, it will come back with some changes, and you can decide whether the changes are appropriate or not. But that's really, this is getting better and better at making changes to provide more inclusive language and so forth. And, just the change of the syllabus, the change in the tone of the syllabus can make a big difference in terms of the initial impression your course makes. And this isn't directly related to that, but one thing I always suggest is that one of the most deadly things you can do on the first day of class is just to spend the day going through the syllabus point by point. You're much better off talking about what the class is going to provide for students, talk about what they'll be doing, why they're going to be doing it, and using that much of the first day, at least, to make some connections with the students about trying to let them understand in what ways the course might be useful to them, and perhaps even asking them, how might this course be useful? Because that can set a much more positive tone than just going through and saying, these are the things you have to do this semester. It's the first impressions that students make in the class are formed very quickly at the beginning, and the syllabus is probably one of the worst ways of doing that typically. Have them work through the syllabus. If you want to use a syllabus quiz, that's not a bad thing, but don't spend the whole first day or that syllabus day. One time I was giving a workshop and someone talked about syllabus week. And, giving up a week of the semester is probably not the most productive use of anybody's time. And it's probably not the best way to provoke students' curiosity and interest in the subject. Okay, so that's the first thing. And you can do this with any assignment. And again, when we write our assignments, we are doing it from the perspective of someone who's been working in our discipline for a while. Or we've done, even if we try to write assignments sort of like the ones that we were successful in, we were the students who made it through our undergraduate program and enjoyed being there. Our students aren't always at the same level, or don't always have the same sort of background that we did when we entered our classes. So again, asking an AI tool to evaluate any assignment we give them for areas where there might be some misunderstandings or confusion, or where the text might be misunderstood by students is really good. Okay, so. And again, it does provide some discussion of positive things that were in that original syllabi. And again, we didn't look at the syllabus, but it just illustrates how this could work with any course. Okay, now, so that's one of the first things we can do. Getting back to there, okay. We'll come back to that, I think. Another thing is to evaluate the reading level of content. To do the multiple means of engagement again, we want to make sure that the students connect to this. Another thing you can do is convert the resources in alternative formats. And that's one of the areas where Notebook LM can be really handy. You can upload up to 50 items to it, which could be PDFs, they could be websites, they could be Word documents, they could be audio files, or they could be public YouTube videos that have transcripts. And it will create summaries of those in other formats, and we'll take a look at that very shortly. You can also use AI tools to caption audio files. But Notebook LM in particular is really good at creating briefing documents, self-tests, or audio podcasts. And we can go through that in a minute. Now, for multiple means of representation, we want to make sure that everything meets accessibility standards, both because it's a good thing and because it's also the law as of next April again. And it actually has been the law for close to 20 years now. But now they've defined that more precisely, and we're put in a position where we really should do this. Okay. But again, one of the reasons for taking textual material and putting it in audio or video formats is that we know, and with a tremendous amount of research, that providing the same material in different modalities increases long-term recall. Just seeing the same information from multiple perspectives tends to reinforce the learning. It makes stronger neural connections. And it, again, it increases the likelihood that students will retain that information and be able to use it in the future. And also, I think it was yesterday, if not, it was one of the workshops I attended at the SUNY CIT conference last week, but a lot of students will drive to or commute from some distance to class, and having things in an audio format allows them to listen to the material while they're driving. And I've had students in the past say that, they were on a sports team, and they would, while they were running or jogging or doing other things, they would often listen to recordings of the class or listen to an audio summary of what we were discussing in class, or they would have a reader read PDFs that they were supposed to be reading for class, and they'd listen to it while they were running or while they were doing some other work. And sometimes people were doing this while they were at work somewhere. But again, it's important not to confuse that with learning styles, because we know we do not have people who are visual learners. I think we've done enough about that in workshops. But it often is confused. And sometimes some of the advocates of UDL will start talking about learning styles. But the main point is seeing things in different formats benefits everybody. Okay, so now, has everyone here used Notebook LM? Everyone used Notebook LM? Is that okay? Well, then we'll go through that a little bit. And to use Notebook LM, one thing that's really good to use is OER text, and there are OER texts in a lot of disciplines. You could use video resources. In many disciplines, there's crash course materials. Those are materials put together by an organization founded by John Green and his brother. And there's a lot of really good videos there in history and economics. And I'm not sure what other fields. Those are just the ones I've seen the most. Khan Academy has some decent materials as well for students who need some remedial work with math and other aspects. And if you're not sure what to put in, Notebook LM can help locate them. And then once you've done that, you can share a podcast, briefing document, an infographic, or an entire notebook. And here's just one that I put together. This was one I was curious to see what it would do. Bastiat's section from the manufacturers of candles, tapers, lanterns, sticks, street lamps, etc. And has everyone seen that petition? This was done back in the 1800s when France was considering some trade restrictions, and it wanted to introduce some trade barriers. And Bastiat was an economist who was somewhat opposed to that. So in any case, what he argued basically, well, actually, let's do this. If we go to the Notebook LM I created, I thought I linked to it right there, but let's do that. So let's go to Notebook LM. Notebook lm.google.com. And I'm hoping, okay, it's allowing me to get to here. Okay, so here is, I just fed this into a PDF of this, and here's a description of it. And let's just play the podcast. Here we go. We won't listen to the whole thing.
The sun is waging a
Or maybe
merciless,
we won't listen to
unrestricted
any of
war
it.
on the French lighting industry.
It's so funny. And there's a specific joke he throws in here that I absolutely love. The petition.
Let's stop that. Crestron, audio settings. We had problems here, and this may be part of it. Are you hearing it online? It should be going through the Crestron node to the speakers. And I did hear things through the speakers earlier today when I tested it before they started fixing some of the problems.
I want you to imagine a scenario for a second. Imagine you wake up, pour your coffee, check the news, and you see that a massive coalition of powerful industrialists
The first
are marching
day
on the
in a
Capitol.
new room is
Which
always
industry
a
are we
problem.
talking about
We
here?
didn't use this
Well,
room yesterday.
just
Let
some
me
of the
go to
wealthiest,
sound
most
settings.
influential business leaders in the entire country, right? And they are demanding
Speaker,
that the government pass this
it
strict
changed.
zero tolerance law, forcing every single citizen to permanently board up their windows.
Turn up
Board
the
up their
volume.
windows.
Yeah, seal their skylights, pull down heavy blackout curtains. Basically, any crack of natural light entering a building
It
will
should
be
be
met with
playing it
severe
here.
penalties.
That is, I mean, it sounds like the inciting
Let's try it
incident
now.
of a dystopian science fiction novel or a slightly terrifying corporate villain origin story.
Right,
Okay,
it sounds completely insane. But what if I told you this exact scenario was actually the basis for one of the most brilliant, most cutting pieces of economic analysis ever
let's
written?
try.
It's just such a wild premise to start with.
It really is.
Yeah.
So today
This
we
is
are
frustrating. Well, what Basio, let's see. You can hear it online. So it's just an issue with the sound in here. And okay, well, in any case, it really does work. Now, it creates a two-person audio file with a male and female speaker, and they alternate. Sometimes it'll be the male speaker who leads and the female that follows, or vice versa. And they have voices that sound remarkably realistic. You'll even hear the breath sounds in between words. You'll hear a few ums and so forth. And it's a very, very realistic audio file. And you're starting to see these things appear more and more on YouTube and social media in general, and you'll recognize the voices of the two fake or the two virtual podcast hosts. So let's just try creating one, and I'd encourage you to do this too. So let's go, and we're going to create a new notebook. So go to notebooklm.google.com, and it's really an impressive tool. So what would we like to create one on? Anyone? On what? Disney. Okay. So what aspects of Disney? Disney in education and higher ed, maybe? Sure. Okay, let's just try that. One thing we can do is now there's search capabilities. And this will let us find some things. And you notice over here, it's coming up with its own search of websites to find materials that might be relevant. Okay, and let's see. So let's make this a little bit bigger. Can we stretch this? Yeah. So here, well, this is the education investment program. Now that's more specifically their programs there. Well, Disneyfication of campus spaces, that's a little bit different. These may not be, let's do this. Let's go to scholar.google. And let's go to, let's look for Disney and higher ed. And we're probably more likely to get a good starting point. Here we go, Disney and the Academy. So let's download that. And again, I'm not sure how good these sources are, but let's go and we're back to, I didn't close that, did I? I did. One more time, Scholar, Disney, and higher ed. And mapping the Disney curriculum. We can download this. Security check needed. Okay. I'm not sure how long that type of security is going to work with agentic AI. And then let's go back and grab one more just for fun of it, how not to teach Disney. Let's try that. The JSTOR article. And we'll download that. Okay, and now let's go back to Notebook LM. And we're not going to import any of those. We're going to instead go back to, and let's call this Disney. Disney and higher ed. And we want to go back to sources. We'll add sources, and we're going to go to upload files, grab. I thought I downloaded more than two. I know I did, but oh well. I must have it up somewhere. And now what happens is we can have it do a little bit more research based on the ones that we found. It can now narrow it down a little bit more. And let's say we want to add sources. Well, are there any websites that might focus on this? To teach political science? Or is that, well, let's just see. Pop culture and politics. Let's see if there's anything there. Well, actually, well, that could work. Let's download that too. Okay, more sources is generally a bit better. So now let's go back and add that one in to Notebook LM. Actually, there we have the thing. So we're going to add the sources directly by an upload. And was this the one we just added? Yeah. Oh no, that was there before. Why did it not download that? Save. Okay, maybe that didn't come up. The acceptance number, it shows it there twice, so I'm not sure why it wasn't finding it. So one more time, upload file. Refresh, there we go. And it's still not full. Maybe whatever ate the audio is eating this. But in any case, now let's say we've got that. So now what you can do is you can ask a question of the information, you can query it, or you can just have it generate some things. And one of the most fun things to do, and this is something that students tend to enjoy, is to generate an audio podcast. This is going to take a few minutes, but we can let it sit in the background. You could also have it generate a video file, an explainer video. And it could be, let's do a brief one so it won't take quite as long to generate. And you can even have it generate a slide deck. And this is something that they demonstrated at the Google AI Day here on campus. And a couple of people demonstrated that in workshops here yesterday. And I think that it should show you what's progressing down at the bottom. So it's generating an audio, video, and slide deck. And it can also generate a flashcards to help students study material. It can also generate a summary, a report, which you can then query and reshape in different ways. It can generate an infographic, and this often will take less time. So let's try that as well. And if there's data there, it can summarize that and put them in data tables for you that you could then analyze. There's also now a mind map thing. And I have reached my daily slides limit, I guess because I did generate some last night, but there's one set being generated today. So now the slides they create have two issues. One is they're really busy. They have a lot of decorations on them and the text is often kind of buried. And the other is every single slide it generates is an image. So it's not particularly accessible. They look nice if you like really cluttered slides, but again, you'd have to do a fair amount of work to make them fully accessible. So I know a lot of people are using this and you're starting to see this in more and more presentations, but again, it's kind of moving us away from accessibility. Okay, so now this will take place in the background, but has anyone else tried this and have you seen what it will do? Well, here's a summary that it's giving us. It's talking about how integrating Disney themed curricula to explore subjects ranging from business management, storytelling to social science. They often use them as Disney parks as immersive learning environments, etc., which is kind of fun. It talks about dedicated research labs, internships, leadership training. Some students have self-designed majors. And then here are some questions you can ask that it suggests if you want to get a follow-up. So let's say, how do universities use this? And you can click it and it will give you a summary based on what's in the sources. Travel, place-based experiences, business and management studies, and here's some case studies at Ball State. Millsap College, travel there to Disney World for field research on ethnographic projects. Mellon, a Disney Research Lab, professional research. So you see it, and then you can ask your own question. It will suggest some, if you're not sure what to ask, but it's not bad. And then the flashcards, again, probably these readings would not be the best source of this, but if you have, say, a textbook that's OER, you could upload it chapter by chapter, create a notebook for each chapter, and let students interact with us. And basically, you can share this with all the students in your class, and each one of them would be able to query it and ask questions, to get self-tests, to do some flashcards if they want to do some simple retrieval practice. It will generate a quiz on the material, and the quizzes will be different each time you use it. And here it could be more or fewer, and you can select a level of difficulties. And let's just go with medium, standard. And again, without having read this material, it's not clear what's going to be picked up. But again, in terms of instructional applications and automatically generating review materials for students, it's a really powerful tool. Now, one issue is that the way our account is set up, and this is true for most, you can only share the notebook with students who are either in a group or students with specific individuals. You can't just make it publicly shareable. However, the materials that you download can be. So the briefing documents you can download, the video you could download, the audio files you could download, and so on. And then you could just put them right in the LMS. And let's see what this is. This was, oh, here's the infographic. And it generates really nice infographics. And again, you can rate it, putting it up or down to help improve it or customize it for your own uses. But we've got 75 specialized Disney courses. They were discovered in those reading articles that we did. And again, here's a nice trade-off between the childhood nostalgia and critical academic analysis. So yeah, so that generates pretty quickly. So we can close that. Let's see if anything else has generated yet. The flashcards have, yeah. And here we go. Yeah, I don't know. Disney themed courses. It wasn't, it was what? It was on that card. It's 30 something, 20 something. I don't remember, but you click 75. There we go. Okay. So, and then you can move on to the next predominant themes in Disney college courses. And then you can flip it. Oops. Oh no, I was advancing. So you click it to flip. So those were the main themes. Then we go on to the next flashcard. Again, without having read the material, but you know, that's not a bad way to help students review. It's kind of fun, and they're getting to do a little retrieval practice, and you know, it works. So those are the flashcards. Let's get back to the other materials created to see if anything else has been. The Disney quiz, we've got the here we've got this might be the audio file, which unfortunately we're not going to be able to play here. No, that's the infographic. Okay, never mind. The video is still forming and the audio is still forming. And the slide deck is still forming. But again, if you could put any of your course material here, and if there's some good YouTube videos, you could link to them, and it will create really nice summaries. And then when students query it, they're very unlikely to get hallucinations because it's drawing only from the materials that it's using in its training database. So the information tends to be really reliable. And again, it's pretty much standalone, although you could embed any videos or other things right in Brightspace. So you could download that. So if you want to share the whole thing to allow students to use, you would go up to the share thing, and then, you can copy the link. But that's to the chat. Okay, but that would just put it in the chat view. But you'd add people or groups. So what you would probably do there, and what I would do, and what I think most people do, is if you go into Brightspace, you can make a copy of your gradebook, copy the column of emails, and then just paste it in there. And then this would be shared with them. And then you could put in a link to it, and then they'd be able to get that. Yeah, it's not built in, unfortunately, and it would be nice if it was. And I don't know. Well, let's just do a quick search. And notebook LM, the integrated. into Brightspace. Yeah, so it's not directly part of it, you know, right. And what I'm wondering is there is a Google Drive plugin, and I'm wondering if the Google Drive plugin would allow you to directly connect it from there. Yeah, I'm not sure. So yeah, so it looks like it's not, there is no connection at this point. You know, these things change pretty rapidly. And given how many people are using NotebookLM now, I really wouldn't be surprised if that did, you know, if that was added at some point. Okay, so there we can close those. Let's get back to the NotebookLM and let's just see. Yeah, I was hoping you could just share the whole thing as a link and then let people just click on it and go there. But I think you have, the way it's configured, you have to set it up to do that. Now, one nice thing about our accounts, which is different from how other campuses set up their Google integration with Google AI, is that we can share it outside of our campus. So we can create things that, as long as you have their email address, you can share it with them, but you can't make it public, at least not at this point. Some campuses you can only share within the institution. And that's also true with the way our gems are set up in Gemini, the chatbots. Okay, so it's still working there. We can let it simmer in the background. But again, grabbing information and sharing it this way provides a really nice review resource where students can use it on their own time, ask their own questions, and get information that's customized for them. And again, they can ask it to query or to help them review whatever material they're struggling with the most. And it does a really nice job of summarizing materials. Okay, so that's another thing you can do. Or one thing I'd really recommend, and I've done it a little bit, but not as much as I'm hoping to do in the future. Okay, I think I may have skipped a slide. No, okay. I think these are not the slides I intended to use, but because I did have some more links in there. And then the last part of UDL is providing multiple means of action and expression. So, you know, letting them do a paper is one option. But unessays are another approach. And I know Maggie has done that, did some workshops on that in the past. Jessamine Newhouse did that, and she's written quite a bit about it. Basically, an unessay is an assignment where students have a rubric which says what they have to demonstrate. And basically, they have any way they'd like to demonstrate that, as long as it's not an essay, because they get so many essay assignments, and essays are so easy to do with AI tools. You could have them do presentations, create videos, create podcasts, create a game, board game, for example, an infographic, generate cartoons, interpretive dance, have them create songs. And in fact, for many years, about 15, 20 years, I had students that the program I was teaching in at Duke do something, basically an essay at the end. Some of them did debates, some of them created videos, some of them created podcasts. And I had listed interpretive dance, and I put in a little link to the Dance Your PhD competition. And the last 2 or 3 years I was teaching there, they actually took me up on that, and they created an interpretive dance along with a song that they wrote and performed and recorded. And then they danced to the song. It was kind of interesting, and they were actually really sound economic principles embodied in it, and they had fun with that. Basically, for this to work, though, you should design and possibly co-create rubrics with your students, or even with the AI tool, tied to the learning objectives in your course that can work with multiple projects, because, there's a lot of ways in which students can demonstrate their understanding. And one of the key components of UDL is sometimes referred to as autonomy supportive teaching, giving students more autonomy. When students have more say in the course, when we have more say on what they're going to be studying, how they're going to be evaluated, what sort of things should be important in terms of the evaluation, they'll often come up with things that are very similar to what you would create, but if they had a voice in helping to create it, they're much more likely to buy into it and accept it than if it's imposed on them. That when people are free to do things that they think are important or useful, they're much more likely to spend time on it and enjoy spending time on it than if they feel that it's being imposed on them. So, and active learning strategies are useful, and AI can be used to help do all those things. I think this is where, okay, this is what I was doing. So if you want to allow students to do multiple means of expression, action and expression, you can have them use AI, or you can use AI to help create tutorials on how to create videos, how to create podcasts, what tools are available for infographics and so forth. You don't have to necessarily know how to do all this yourself. You can use the AI tools to help do that, or show students how they can use those tools to help them do this. Assist in creating or co-creating rubrics, formulate, revise assignments, etc., to be inclusive and active and tied to course learning objectives. And this can make the course more enjoyable for us as well as for students. And I think the next slide, I'm missing something here. I put in some things. No, I know where it is. It's in one of the other workshops today. Sorry. Okay. But one of the things that Tom Tobin has suggested is that instead of trying to implement every aspect, every one of those little principles in the UDL framework, of which there's a lot of them, 30 some, you could just add one of them to your course and give students one other way of connecting to the course concepts. Give them some different alternative readings, for example, or give them one other way of demonstrating their learning, etc. You don't have to make all the changes at once, and that +1 approach makes it a whole lot easier to gradually allow your course to become, to implement more of the UDL framework. And here's a resource document, which I guess I didn't put well, if you have the slides, you could just click on the resource document link here. And here are some basic links. These links are basically providing some support and research for why these things are important. Some other examples. These are among the main platforms out there. I didn't have Gemini. This I put together earlier, and let's throw that in just because we should. Honestly, I use Gemini less than I use most of the other platforms out there, but I should switch to using it more and more. But yeah, so, and the advantage of Gemini is that we all have access to it, students have equal access to it. I created a number of chatbots back in ChatGPT, but one problem with those is that when students were using them, the students who had a free account couldn't use them as long or ask as many questions or get as much support as the students who had a paid account. And as a result, it was somewhat inequitable. So I've been porting them from ChatGPT to Gemini, because in Gemini, all students have exactly the same access. And in fact, the access that Gemini provides is a bit larger than what free accounts provide with pretty much any of the other large language models out there. Okay, so here's some of the research and support on providing multiple means of engagement. And Jed Lakai, and well, Ed has done some research on this, and he's also on a podcast where we talked about this, talking about why it's important to give students multiple ways of connecting to the material. And here's some prompts on using AI to create. Well, let's just jump over for a second. Multiple means of engagement. And here are some things I'd suggest we try. Let's say, well, here, let me just take one of these. Labor economics course on compensating wage differentials using hedonic pricing models. And it's just asking for some active learning activities that can be completed by students in 10 to 15 minutes. I know I have Gemini. Let me get rid of that thing that keeps popping up on the screen. There we go. Oops. Okay. And now Gemini is here somewhere, but it can always be somewhere else. Okay. So I'm just going to paste that in, except I got the wrong URL. One more time. Where's that prop? See, normally I have two monitors and I have everything arranged right over, but here we go. I don't need the version history here. Apparently I do. Okay. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to copy that again, this time correctly, and I'm going to paste it in. And here are 15 active learning activities tailored for a course where students had introductory micro and macroeconomics. And they're breaking down into 3 core themes: mapping the theory, real world applications, and policy and equity implications. And give each group a large piece of paper, a digital canvas, and have them graph the firm's isoprofit curve, which is the type of thing we do in that course. Have them visually demonstrate what happens if there's a technological breakthrough, which makes the equipment 50% cheaper, and then have them show the shift in the curve along with a 30-second explanation of whether the firm will offer higher or lower wages for the same level of risk. Contingency tournament. Provide workers with 3 different risk profiles, whether they're risk averse, risk loving, or neutral, which means how much extra workers have to be paid to compensate for the risk. Have them plot indifference curves and identify where the equilibrium sorting, given the relationship between wages and risk. And let's see, mathematical matchmaker, we give them a utility function and have them graph the exact compensating wage differential required to keep the worker at the baseline utility, to keep their happiness constant, and have them come up with a plain English analogy of what the hedonic envelope actually represents, avoiding all economic jargon. The analogy must explain why the envelope curve is not an indifference curve or isoprofit, but rather a market clearing line. It's basically the relationship between wages and risk you'd expect to see happening in the labor market. You could also have them do value of a statistical life. So, these are kind of interesting applications that might be engaging to students. And it would take me more than a few seconds to come up with 15 examples. And if you don't like them, you could just say, provide 10 more, and it will do that. Or if the level seems to be too high or too low, you could say, make these a little bit more challenging, or perhaps, these students have less mathematical background or still are struggling with it. So, perhaps you can make some adjustments. And here's the hedonic treadmill and Salig's bias. And again, you can pick things that work and modify it again so that it's consistent with the language you're using in class. And it's a great way to come up with some new ideas. Just give it some concept you want to convey to students and ask for active learning activities. And you could say, you could modify that to say, and I think I did put in there a time restriction on it saying, I think 10 to 15-minute long activity, but you could do for a whole class period. You could come up with a week-long activity or something similar. Let's see, I think this was a document. No. Here we go. Some other sample prompts. Well, this is what we were teaching about before. That's actually the thing we did at the very beginning. Oh, here's one. This is the, again, I'm not sure we want students to be writing essays now, but it does illustrate the sort of concept. This is about price ceilings and price floors. There we go. This is an area where, we cover this in class, and it's something where students understand it on the diagram. They can display the diagram, but if you ask them how that applies to the effects of a natural disaster, or how perhaps it may apply if we're dealing with pharmaceutical or ticket scalping, it breaks down because they have really strong opinions on the issue, and they often have trouble connecting the theory that they're learning to what's happening out there. And it's kind of interesting to get them to confront the difference between what they can do with the graphs and the real world applications. And here's some relevant, interesting examples. And, because this is trained on so much materials created by so many academics, so many institutions, it comes up with some examples that, again, it would take us a lot longer to think up by ourselves. And again, we often tend to get stuck doing things in the same way year after year, using the same examples, and they may be comfortable to us, but they may not always be as engaging to our students. And so in any case, let's just see what some of the other sample prompts are. Okay, here, sunk costs, one of those behavioral biases where, economists argue that sunk costs should not matter. And yet in practice, they do. It's one of those areas of behavioral economics where there's a bit of a difference between how people behave and how we claim that rational economic agents would behave. Spend 6 hours watching the first 3 episodes of a new streaming episode. You're bored, find the plot confusing. You've got 3 hours of free time. And what will you do? The time loss. And the only thing you can control is whether you watch the next. That may not be the best example. The all-you-can-eat buffet is kind of an example. So, this is an example that students will often connect to a bit. If you have to pay to fix it, it's more expensive to actually fix the old one than it would be to buy a new one. But students may not always necessarily see that. Invested 3 years of tuition, late night studying, emotional energy, but they're really not enjoying their major. And they're miserable, but switching to a new major would take 1 extra semester. And basically the sunk costs, how much time they spend in the past should not matter, although with financial aid, that may have a different impact. But there's some interesting examples. And again, you can modify these, however you'd like, but it just shows some of the possibilities that are there. Let's see what else. Oh, this is one of my favorite ones. Asking an AI tool, this one I put together after the last election, which is kind of scary, but, well, asking the AI tool to role play is kind of a fun activity. And this could be done also with a chatbot where you ask students to interact with it and then submit the transcript or a link to their discussion or their interactions, where you could have someone interview. Well, actually, let's try this. Play the role of Walt Disney, let's say, and what? And respond to well, actually, let's just do a really simple prompt. You can do something more elaborate, but respond to questions as it or in the role of Walt Disney. And then, and if you did this as a chatbot, whatever, so you could ask questions, you know, what would you like to ask Walt Disney? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. He's dodging the question. He's building environments, but well, a massive portion of it be set aside as a wilderness preserve. So actually, it's kind of a marketing thing, but also, you know, clean energy buses, the nature documentaries he used to do. By the way, I just saw a couple of months ago that now the parks are using solar energy to run pretty much all their daytime activities. It's not quite enough to get them through the night, but they are getting a bit greener that way. So it's not a bad activity, but you know, you could have someone play the role of John Mill, or you could have them play, or have this play the role, and then have students interview about some current policy issue. I've had students interview David Ricardo about tariff and such things, and you know, and some of the things being proposed by our current president, and to see how Ricardo would respond. Got you. You started to say. Yeah. And you could have them do an interview or ask about political issues, and it will play the roles often remarkably well. There was a podcast about 2 years ago done by an economist at George Mason. I can't think of his name offhand, but in any case, he was he had an AI tool play the role, I think it was ChatGPT, of Jonathan Swift, and he interviewed him, but he would run it through a voice synthesizer that had a Scottish voice. And the whole podcast episode was a discussion between him and Jonathan, I think GPT Swift, I think he called it. But it was an interesting application of how AI could be used. And, you know, students might find that interesting. You could also have them critically evaluate it to see if what it's saying is consistent with what they've read about that. They could reflect on that, for example. You know, and that's something that's a bit harder for them to use AI to do, or they're using AI in a productive way, and also evaluating that output. So there's a number of sample prompts here, but basically there's a growing number of those. And well, here's another useful tactic, and this is something worth encouraging students to do, where you could have students explain something to the AI and have it grade their explanation and give them feedback on that and guide them to a deeper understanding. Or, you could have students talk about what they have trouble with and then have it generate a customized tutorial, basically. And students often will feel more comfortable doing this, especially first-gen students, who are less likely to come to our office hours or less likely to ask questions in class if they don't really feel they belong as much as other students, if they don't feel as comfortable as you want to create an environment where they are comfortable. But sometimes students are afraid that they don't want to ask what they perceive as a dumb question. And they're much more comfortable doing this with an AI tool that's not going to make them feel embarrassed, or where they won't feel as embarrassed asking something as they might in the classroom, for example, or even during office hours. And also for students who are working during your office hours and not available, it does provide some additional support. So, it's a great partner in developing and refreshing courses and making courses interesting. Did anyone online try any of these things? Oh, if you talk, we probably can't hear you. So I just realized that. Yeah, that's unfortunate. I want to get back to the current version, but okay. Okay, I guess that's pretty much all I have, but any questions? And again, if you're online, we'll have to get the chat going. And I'll see if we can get CTS over here to get the chat working again. No? Okay, well, we'll stop here. But again, I'd encourage you just to play with this, and I probably should have allowed more time for that during this. Next time I will, for the next session.